Hello, dear ones, and welcome to music lovers, poetry lovers, and those who love to worship the Lord with music and song, and those who have an interest in music history and music theory. In this episode, I want to look at a wonderful 18th century hymn by a very much lesser known composer in its historical context. The tune is Wareham by William Knapp, published in 1738. It's the main tune he's known for, although thanks to the miracle of the internet and archive.org, his hymn book from which it comes and some of his other books are accessible. So we'll have a look at that hymn book, a set of new psalm tunes and anthems. Set is spelt S-E-T-T if you're looking for it. I love Wareham. It's sweet, lively and happy. Hundreds of texts have been paired with it over many generations. William Knapp, like Isaac Smith, who we looked at in the Cooper episode, is not a well-known figure, but this one very popular piece is extremely good and well-loved. And like Isaac Smith, he was what we might call an ordinary person, because hymns were music for all the people. Not everyone could compose minuets for the court of a duke or prince, but anyone could write a hymn or a hymn tune. And if it was good, it would be heard by a wide audience and sung. To put Wareham in context, I want to compare it to an earlier Baroque tune by Johann Cruger, who has several popular hymn tunes still in hymn books. This is a tune from the early mid-Baroque, whereas Wareham is what we might say the late Baroque. The wonderful Baroque era didn't end suddenly. Conventionally, 1738 would be considered near the end of the Baroque era, but this is the era of Handel and J.S. Bach, with C.P.E. Bach just beginning his wonderful career of innovation, and many new ideas were around that would give rise to the works of the most famous composers in history. It was really an age of innovation. The early 18th century really has a new sound, which I think this tune encapsulates. I'd like to look at some of the texts that are often paired with these two tunes, as well as some other hymn texts from closer in time to when the tunes were written. Let's start with two little-known tunes by these two interesting composers, starting with William Knapp. That tune is called Pool Tune and has the epigraph, "For the happy restoration of King Charles II." That tune's called Gordon Tune and has an epigraph for the life of the people of Blandford on 4th June, being the day the town was destroyed by fire. Gordon would make a lovely folk tune, but there's no obvious record anywhere of any folk singer having sung it. Now let's listen to some Johann Cruger. That's tune number 135 from Praxis Pietatis Mellica, The Practice of Piety in Song, by Johann Cruger. That book was released in several editions around the year 1653. The Crüger piece I want to look at, in our hymn book and probably many others, is paired with Hail to the Lord's Anointed, and the tune is simply called Crüger. It's an interesting tune. I couldn't find the original source, which for me is not all that surprising, but more importantly, I couldn't find anyone who cited the original source. It was common for Victorian hymn composers to write in the general style of older composers, and it's possible that this is a later parody. So that's parody as in a stylistic imitation, not a mockery. However, it's recorded in Hymns Ancient and Modern with a harmonization by W.H. Monk, and it says the tune is by Crüger. Now, Monk was a top scholar. He was a pioneer in music scholarship, so I believe that tune really is by Crüger. If we have a look at the scores, we can see that Baroque writers used quite an abbreviated notation. The performer is meant to fill in the middle voices, so there's a figured bass here. This was an age of improvisation and an age when the technique of melody and chords was becoming common in composition rather than the interlaced voices of the Renaissance. We will look at Renaissance material in another episode, which is coming soonish. You can also see that the Baroque scores don't have neat bars with a fixed number of beats, although these pieces do have fairly strong rhythms. So Crüger in the hymn books has certainly been adapted, but it feels right, and I'm guessing it was quite faithfully adapted. This highlights the importance of the hymn book revolutions of the 19th century. There were two parallel such revolutions. First, there was a wonderful range of US hymn books, or we would say American hymn books, documenting and bringing to life a glorious range of tunes and texts from all sorts of sources, many American, but many English and some historical. Secondly, there is the effect of the increasingly scholarly approach taken in 19th century Britain that led to Hymns Ancient and Modern, which we talked about in the last episode, as well as some hymnals before it and many, many after it. Editors and musical editors began researching older and older tunes. Crüger has been arranged by William Henry Monk. He and others of that generation preserved and passed on knowledge and art from before their time, and we are blessed by their efforts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's the tune Crüger. Part of the fun of researching hymns, firstly, is how much information is out there these days. You can browse through the database, and there's a wonderful labyrinth, an endless labyrinth of connections. I've mentioned before hymnary.org, archive.org, and imslp.org. You can just go for a long journey through all these historical hymn books and hymn tunes. I was looking for other pairings of texts for Wareham and Crüger. I came across a good one for Crüger and a very appropriate one. The English text is by Sarah Laurie Findlayson and Jane Laurie Borthwick. Sarah Laurie Findlayson, her maiden name was Borthwick. They were two very scholarly sisters, and they wrote the text, "Rejoice, rejoice, believers." This is an artistic translation of a text by Laurentius Laurenti called "Erumtut euch, ihr Frommen." The text really suits the tune, both in metre and emotion, and the original German text is somewhat close in time to the Crüger tune. The text is from 1700, so actually a little later, but certainly closer than the Victorian lyrics in our hymn book. So that gives us a German poet and a German composer, both from around the mid-Baroque. And according to John Julian of the Dictionary of Hymnology, 1907, excerpts of which are often linked in hymnary.org, this is Laurentius Laurenti's best text. When translating a poem or literary text, translators have to consider the following. They have to consider line-by-line accuracy, thematic and stylistic accuracy, poetic rhythm and meter, and poetic beauty. And in the case of hymns, being able to sing a text to the same tune as the original. And of course, to meet all of these criteria is impossible and has never once been achieved. So it's an artistic balancing act. Laurenti was a generation or so after Crüger. He died around the time Knapp was writing his first tunes. Here's a look at just part of the original German, thanks to Google Translate. German is really a beautiful language when it's well written, especially. It's full of soft fricatives like versehen and schlafet, and it has wonderful rhythms and some gorgeous compound nouns, Frühlingsschein, Abendröte. You couldn't translate this line for line. It's not possible. It's been fairly loosely translated for meaning. It's certainly not line by line. I think the sisters did a nice job of it. So here is the Crüger tune with a couple of verses of "Rejoice, rejoice, believers." I'm self-conscious about my singing, but I do it anyway, so thank you for your patience.
You saints who hear in patience your cross and sufferings bore, shall live and reign forever when sorrow is no more. Around the throne of glory
Let's take a very quick look at William Knapp's book. So William Knapp was born in 1698 in Wareham, Dorset, so that's where the Wareham tune name comes from. He died on the 26th of September 1768 in Poole, Dorset. He was a glover by trade and for many years served as a parish clerk and choir master at the parish church of St James in Poole. He published several books, but included two important hymn collections, a set of new psalm tunes and anthems in 1738, the one we're looking at now, and New Church Melody in 1753. With his work as a glover and a parish clerk and probably a local musician, getting the odd gig, he probably earned about £15 to £25 a year. And this book is amazing. It is full. It's beautifully typeset, for one thing, and it's full of engraving. The engraving alone, the estimate is that it would probably have cost £40. That puts the dedication in context from John Saintlow, Esquire, with his rather charming little poem. Forever pleased in public to commend and show the world the merit of a friend. He must have given him a lot of encouragement. It's got some interesting lines in it, the poem. Thy tuneful voice each listening youth inspires, and with devotion fills our hallowed choirs with a Q-U. Thy various notes in just proportion bound improve the native harmony of sound. And then there's this interesting couplet. In vain the nymph displays her blooming charms, in vain she tempts me to her circling arms. And you wonder, is he confessing something there? The word nymph meant something very different in those days, of course, that in the 17th century and the 18th century, Greek myth was the language of storytelling for this culture. So it didn't have the intense connotations it has in our time. The book would not have existed without its subscribers. There's a reasonable list of the subscribers. There are 2.5 pages of subscribers, about 167 altogether. So William Knapp was well supported by a fairly local community, and they can be very proud of him, and their financial contribution was important. There's an explanation of how to do a trill, quite an intricate trill and very Baroque, sort of intricate ornamentation. And there's a pronunciation guide. The long syllables were pronounced Latinate style. Here's Poole tune for the 29th of May, being the happy restoration of King Charles II. This is not a political statement by William Knapp. These were church feasts, celebration days. Now this one is called Gordon tune, but in the table of contents it's called Morden tune. And Morden is actually a place in Dorset, so Gordon tune is probably an error. And on page 18 there's the Wareham text. But Lord, thy mercy, my future hope, above the heavenly orb ascends, thy sacred truth's unmeasured scope beyond the spreading sky extends. This is a paraphrase of the Tate and Brady hymn book, which was an important hymn book in the Anglican Church, slightly modified. The rest of the book is just packed with music. Sometimes it's a little hard to know which voice is holding the melody. It was often the tenor that held the melody, but sometimes, he says, sometimes the cantus is in the treble, meaning the top voice, and the treble clef. Most of the book is taken up with these anthems. There are many of them. They look very interesting. I really wanted to sing the tune Morden, so thank you for your patience. I've chosen a text by John Newton of Amazing Grace fame, the man who collaborated with William Cowper and did so much good in the anti-slavery movement. I've chosen a text called The Book of Nature Open Lies. I hadn't heard this text before, but it suits the style. It represents what we might call natural theology. In the Age of Reason, they talked about liber scripturae, which is the book of Scripture, and liber naturae, which is the book of nature, that we could see God's works in nature.
The book of nature open lies, with much instruction stored, but till the Lord anoints her eyes, we cannot read the word. The knowledge of the saints excels the wisdom of the schools. To them his secrets God reveals, though men account them fools. God's creatures on their senses press, as witnesses to prove their Saviour's power and faithfulness, His providence and love. Thus may we study nature's book to make us wise indeed, and pity them who only look at what they cannot read.
In the music theory section today, we're going to look at something different. It isn't necessarily complicated as such, but it does require a little bit of explanation. I hope you find it interesting. It's called figured Roman numeral analysis. Figured Roman numeral analysis isn't actually complicated once you understand it. When you know what the numbers and numerals mean, it becomes very clear and easy to read. But some explanation is required, so thank you for your patience. I'd like to look at the two central pieces for this episode, Crüger and Wareham, using this method. So with the visual arts, much of the language we use to discuss artworks, such as paintings and so on, use everyday language. Shape, colour, tone, texture, things like that. Everyone loves music, but we don't have an equivalent everyday language to describe what is happening to create the musical effects that we love. That means a big part of music theory is just having the words to describe the things you love. Harmony is the largest component of the colour and texture of music. At least it is for music that is harmonious. Figured Roman numeral analysis is a way of seeing the harmony visually, or at least a way of seeing its outline. There's a lot of terms in harmony, and you sort of have to know them. If you don't know what the terms mean, it all sounds like gibberish. So here's a quick summary from the ground up. First of all, key. A piece of harmonious music has a key. This is sometimes incorporated into the name of the piece, like the Serenade in G major, Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart, or Nocturne No. 20 in C-sharp minor by Chopin. The key of a piece can be thought of as its tonal center. The chord at the center is called the tonic, get tone, tonic, and is represented in Roman numerals by the numeral 1, an I, Roman 1. In do, re, mi, that's do. In the key of C major, the tonic is the chord of C major. In the key of D major, the tonic is the chord of D major. In the key of C minor, the tonic is the chord C minor. And in the key of C major, for example, instead of the chords C, D minor, F, G, we replace them with 1 for the tonic. For D minor, for example, C, D, that's 2, F is 4, G is 5, and so on. Many musicians are well aware of these relationships when they are playing, but the Roman numeral makes it explicit, and it is independent of the actual key. So harmony basically has 2 dimensions. There's the vertical dimension, the notes that are played at the same time, and there's the horizontal dimension. The chords, the chord changes. Each of these contribute to the tension and resolution in music, and to the beauty, the sheer beauty. The Roman numerals in Roman numeral analysis show the relationship of the chord to its key, and they strongly relate to movement. They particularly show things like cadences. A cadence is a chord change that resolves. For example, the feeling of resolution when a phrase ends 5-1. That's what we call a perfect cadence, and it's basically based on the meaning of perfect in Latin, which means completely finished. In figured Roman numeral analysis, the Roman numerals show movement, and the figures show the detail. So let's have some more terminology. A key has a tonic, so in the key of C, 1 was the tonic, and a chord has a root note. So for example, in the chord of C, C is the root note. In the chord of G, G is the root note. The root note is the note that defines the harmonic center of the chord. It is often the note in the bass, but the bass can move. Sometimes the bass will change, but the harmonic center will stay the same. So the Roman numeral doesn't always correspond to the note in the bass. For example, here's the chord G, with G in the bass. And you can play it different ways. It's not always G in the bass, but it always feels like the same chord. An important point to note that we won't go into too deeply today is that the Roman numeral, the harmonic center of the chord, can sometimes be ambiguous or subjective. So sometimes it can be a matter of perception. There are chords where it's up to the listener what they interpret that chord to be. Is the root note in the bass? People ask themselves, what is the harmonic center of this chord? What shall I call it? Is this an A minor 7 or a C6? There are chords like this where the harmonic center is not really clear. With typical major and minor chords, the root note is usually fairly obvious, but in some situations it's a matter of perception. It's up to the judgment of the listener. We'll look at some of these ambiguous chords another time, but for now it's enough to note that the harmonic centre of a chord may be a matter of opinion. The figures can sometimes be quite complex because inner voices, the harmony of the chords, can relate to the key as a whole, and they have movement, and they're also closely connected to the root note of the chord. So the figures have a vertical and a horizontal component. The types of harmonies used, whether they have dissonances or accidentals that are outside the key, also produce tension or calm by themselves, independent of movement. These chordal harmonies are often very beautiful in their own right, and are often one of the most beautiful things about a piece of music or a passage of music. So it's very interesting to be able to look at the harmonies. You can see what's beautiful or artistic about them. Anyway, these are some of the things we can use Roman numerals and figures to visualize. Here are some examples of figured Roman numeral analysis. In the key of C, here is the chord C. It has the Roman numeral 1 because it is the tonic. And the figures 5, 3 because the third and the fifth are the notes in typical major or minor chords, and they appear in this order. You don't have to put the figures in the order they appear in the chord. You could write that 3, 5. In fact, it's historically more common to omit or ignore the order of the voices, known as the voicing. Writing the figures in the order they appear is a modern thing, so you'll see both. However, I've put the voices in the order they appear. Despite loving old hymns, my understanding of music theory is basically modern. In fact, you don't even have to show the figures at all. You will often see just the Roman numerals showing chord movement. It's a very free system. Anyway, here is C major in the key of C, written in the modern style, with the voices in the order they appear. The figures in this case relate to the voicing of the chord. And here is D major in the key of D. A different key, a different chord, but the relationship to the key of the chord is the same. It's the tonic. Back to the key of C. Here is the chord of G7 in the key of C, with only the notes that are played being shown as figures. And here is the chord of A7 in the key of D, with only the notes that are played being shown as figures. You can transpose the key and the chord, but the relationship of the chord to the key will remain the same. The rules for figured Roman numerals are not strict. You can use them in different ways to show different things. It depends on what you want to show. Historically, their use arose from figured bass, and we will touch on this very slightly in this episode. We've talked a little about figured bass earlier this episode and in other episodes, and we will look at it slightly in the musical examples that we use the figured Roman numeral analysis to describe. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk about the importance of 1, 5, and 4 in their Roman numerals. We discussed intervals in some detail in the episode on medieval music and the Renaissance. That was episode 2. The most primary and fundamental interval is the fifth. So an interval is the space between two notes. You have melodic intervals, you have harmonic intervals, and it's the distance in pitch between notes. So the most primary and fundamental interval is the fifth. It comes from nature, from the harmonic series. It's strong, it has an implied sense of harmonic movement, and it defines most chords. It is the starting point of the perfect cadence. It is extremely important. So here's a fifth. 1 is called the tonic. 5 is the fifth. It lies a fifth above the tonic. It can be called the dominant because it's so important. And if you go in the other direction, a fifth below the tonic, you get the fourth. And that can be called the subdominant because it's basically an inversion of the dominant. An inversion meaning it's going in the opposite direction. Don't overthink all these terms. And in fact, the names dominant and subdominant were not even invented until the late 19th century. Before that, they just said fifth, fourth, first, and so on. So the movement from first to fifth and back, and from first to fourth and back, the fifth is a very strong interval. And so, these movements from to and from the tonic with the interval of a fifth have a very powerful sense of harmonic movement. And when you see 1, 4, and 5 in a piece, there's often a strong fundamental movement occurring. So thank you for your patience with this long explanation. This type of analysis is something we will definitely look at again with different pieces. So I wanted to cover it carefully. Now let's look at the tunes. I've used modern notation conventions in this analysis, the one in this video, because these are Baroque tunes and Baroque composers liked clear, pure chords for the most part. The chords are mostly major or minor. A Roman numeral on its own represents a major chord. A Roman numeral with a lowercase m is a minor chord. Using the small m like this is a variation of Roman numeral notation, sometimes used in jazz. And also in the figures for this analysis, I was only really interested in showing one thing, which is the intervals used in the melodies. I haven't used figures to show the chords, just the one note in the melody. These two composers have their own style, but they also represent the musical style of their period to some degree. So you can see the differences between their individual styles as well as the style of the Baroque, and see some of the changes that were happening in music from the mid-Baroque to the late Baroque. For each piece, I've created a long table showing figured Roman numerals and a few other things for comparison. The top 2 rows are the analysis, the rest is to help to understand it. The diagrams have the melody and bass of the music above and below, and a table with 5 lines in the middle. The top 2 lines are a form of the figured Roman numeral analysis, but in this case I've just got one figure showing the top voice. These 2 rows are the important ones. Then for a little bit of extra information, I have the bass note. So I've included the bass note, but I've written it as relative to the root note of the chord. So G/B would be written /3 because B is the third. I've also written the name of the chord in the typical modern chord style. And finally, for reference, I've written how the chord would have been written in figured bass during the Baroque. Most of the time there is no figure. You only get the figure if it's not a major or minor chord. I can't sight read figured bass very easily, but I love the spare, elegant look of it and the way it contains so much information with so few symbols. I want to start with the tune Crüger. The hymn meter of this tune is 7676D, the D meaning it's intended for 8-line verses, D means doubled. The hymn lines are quite short, so I've divided the tune into 4 passages, each of which would accompany 2 lines of text. The second passage is a repeat of the first. So in the first passage, the 2 things that strike you looking at the figured Roman numerals are, firstly, there's a lot of 1s, 4s and 5s, and secondly, the melody contains a lot of pure intervals. It contains a lot of 1s, 3s and 5s, which are the fundamental notes of the chord, the first, third and fifth. This means that since the chords are mostly major or minor, the melody note is one of the notes of the chord. This is the kind of clean harmonic and melodic colour you would see in many folk songs, but there's a lot more chord movement in Crüger than there is in a typical folk song, at least in one that hasn't been heavily rearranged. You can feel the bass and the chords moving the melody around, and here you can see it in the notation. The second passage is a repeat of the first, and the third passage is different in several respects. Firstly, the sharp signs in the figured bass show the change from A minor to A major, or 3 major. This is a bit of a sign of Victorian enhancement. I mentioned in the first half of this episode that this piece as a hymn tune had been tidied up by someone in the Victorian age. The accidentals, the C sharps, and the increase in inner voice movement are not typical of Crüger and the mid-Baroque. So that sort of rich inner voicing with harmonic movement propelled by inner voices you can hear is very likely by a later editor. And if you compare it to the Crüger tune played earlier in the episode, which was very pure and transparent, getting its full effect from the beautiful use of major and minor chords with just a few anticipations and suspensions, this passage has been harmonized in a parody, a stylistic imitation of a later Baroque style with a hint of Bach added. Still, it's a light touch, and that is how hymns work. As we've discussed previously, the hymn genre is very democratic across time. There's something for purists and eclecticists alike. So in the fourth passage, which is the last 2-phrase passage, the essence of this whole tune, actually, this whole hymn tune, is its beautiful melody. The way it is harmonized here has a lot of movement. Apart from one movement from 4 to 5, every chord movement is to or from the tonic to the 5th or 4th, the strong movements of the 5th that we discussed. As well, with the whole piece, every melody note is either a first, a third, or a 5th in relation to the root note of its chord. They are all pure primary intervals. The strong harmonic movement gives it energy, and the energy, combined with the pure, sweet major harmonies and the melody itself, give the piece a glorious feeling of transcendental joy. Moving on to Wareham, to me the essence of William Knapp's style is that it is gentle and delicate, but also there's a leaping ecstasy to the melody in this piece, and in the case of this lovely tune, full of innocent happiness. Wareham suits a 4-line text, a 4-line hymn text. It's considered 8-8-8-8 with syllables across 2 notes and places. Each line is split into 2 short phrases. So like Crüger, I've split it into 4 passages. In the case of Wareham, each passage covers one line of hymn text. There are still a lot of pure intervals in the melody, and there's a lot of 1, 4, and 5 in the harmony. This is what gives it the lively feeling, and it's what makes me link these two pieces in my mind, actually. But Knapp's harmonic choices in this piece are different from Crüger's. This is not really entirely to do with his being of a slightly later era. You wouldn't expect every composition, even of a single composer, to be extremely similar. It's the choices he's made for this particular composition. Looking at it in detail, in bar 2, C minor 6th has most of the same notes as F7. So the change here from 2 minor 6th to 1 is like a softer version of 5-1. In bars 3 and 4, he has the 6 minor, the relative minor of the tonic, so closely related to the tonic, and an E flat 6th. These are slightly softer, less sharply focused changes than Crüger, but that passage still resolves with a nice strong 1-5-1, although even here, in bar 4, the one on the second beat could have been written as 5-6-4, in the Baroque it would have been. So again, these are softer changes. In the second passage, there's a G minor 6th with an E natural, giving a slight feeling of C7 or 2-7, plus a C major in bar 8. This is a new technique for this period, moving slightly away from the key in a sort of prepared way. In a Baroque figured bass, a sharp sign means sharpen, not sharp. So the sharp here means to raise the E flat to the E natural. There's a good term, which is new to me as I was just told it, called functional resonance or affinity. This is when one chord has some of the colour of a different chord. So if we show the affinities, you can see that the 6 minor 6 going to 5 then to 1 has an affinity that is close to a 2-5-1, which jazz musicians will recognise. We'll talk about this progression another time. A sequence of chord changes is called a progression. But I will note that the 2-5-1 change was brand new in this period of history. I haven't seen it in earlier Baroque tunes. It's certainly not the feature it would later become. So Knapp is a pretty switched-on composer for someone who's basically an amateur or semi-professional in this period. The third passage has a nice active bass line, combined with the same softening of the harmonies here and there. So if we add the affinity layer, the chords that these chords are similar to, there's some of that same 1-4-5-1 movement going on, but softened. It also has an interesting bit of modulation ending on 3 major, which is not a chord within the key. This is not a classical style key change like Mozart would later do, but leaves the end of the phrase hanging with lovely anticipation, expecting the next phrase. One final note, in my playing I miss out some of the notes here. In bar 12 the descending bass line is harmonised, which creates a very complex passing chord. This is also reminiscent of later classical music. I have to miss these full harmonies out in my playing because I don't have enough fingers, or my fingers are too slow. I especially love the fourth passage. There are some more 4-6s, the 6th chord in Baroque, and classical music is not the added 6th of modern music, and it's a soft chord with the strong sense of minor, a bit like a relative minor, although it's harmonically pretty closely connected to its root note, so it's definitely a 4 major, but with softer minor overtones. And the melody here is charming. The melody throughout this piece is lovely, actually. In this passage, the harmony moves very gently towards the tonic. It has a B flat over F, almost a resolution. Then the 6 minor, or G minor, is the relative minor. So it has an affinity with the tonic. The bass plays the 5th of B flat in bar 15, the 3rd of B flat in bar 16, softly, gently moving towards the tonic. In bar 15, there's a deceptive cadence, the relative minor of 1. Then the tonic again, but in the first inversion. First inversion is with the 3rd in the bass, so not quite resolved. Finally, the tonic with 1 in bass and melody, a complete authentic cadence. I love that sequence. So much fun to play. Gently but dancingly it glides to a perfect landing with hardly a bump. So that was a long explanation, and there really wasn't all that much I wanted to look at, but I did want to explain figured Roman numerals carefully, because it's a method I'll use again later. It's a useful form of notation, and if you're a musician, or especially if you're a composer, I guess, it's worthwhile to cultivate a perception of where you are in the harmony this way, both vertically with the figures and horizontally with the numerals. Anyway, thank you very much for your patience. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, these lovely, joyous hymns from the mid and late Baroque, respectively. Now I will crave your indulgence once more, as I shall sing the tune Wareham, with the text, "Awake my soul in joyful lays," by Samuel Medley, who was born in 1738, the year that Wareham was published.
Awake my soul to joyful lays, and sing thy great Redeemer's praise. He justly claims a song has always stood. His love and kindness, oh, how good. That's a beautiful hymn, isn't it? Praise be to God.